why do human languages have this funny grammatical structure where their verbs treat the time axis in such a radically different way than they treat the space axis? Well, think about it this way. And this is a thought, I think, one of the most profound 20th century thoughts about time, which, as far as I know, first showed up at the very end of a famous paper by D.C. Williams called The Myth of Passage. A beautiful paper, which I recommend to everybody. This is a paper from the 1950s. And like I say, the reference to this at the end is very brief, but let me try to flesh it out a little bit. So think of the world as this four-dimensional arena that's littered with physical objects. There's a particle over here, there's an electric field over there, there's a haircut over here, blah, blah, blah. And you just look and you conceive of this four-dimensional arena as purely spatial in the sense that there's no one direction that's distinguished in any way from the others. And all that's happened is that the properties are distributed over this four-dimensional arena in one way or another, and that distribution over those properties over this four-dimensional arena is what we call the history of the world, the total history of the world. Good. It might turn out, in some worlds it turns out, in our world it turns out, that just because of the way the properties happen to be distributed, nothing forced them to be distributed that way. Just because of the ways that the properties happen to be distributed, it turns out that you can find a way of chopping up this world into three-dimensional slices so that the conditions on one slice are related by some simple rule to the conditions on other slices in that particular slicing. Let me give you an example. If you chop our world, it's possible to chop our world up into three-dimensional slices such that the total number of particles you find on any one slice is equal to the total number of particles you find on any other slice. Okay? This is true if the slices correspond to what we call time in our world, because fundamental particles don't get created or destroyed. If I took fundamental slices through space rather than through time, it wouldn't be that the total number of particles that shows up on any one slice is the same as the total number of particles that shows up on any other slice. Okay? If one slice is through New York City and the other slice is through intergalactic space, from t equals minus 1 to t equals minus infinity to t equals, you're going to find a lot of particles on the New York slice, very few on the intergalactic slice. Good, but it turns out that if you orient the slices a different way, there's always the same number of particles on one slice as on the other slice. You investigate further, you find that the total energy you find along one slice is the same as the total energy you find along another slice. And the total momentum that you find along one slice is the same as the total momentum that you find along the other slice. That is, you find, and this is just because of the way the properties happen to be distributed, that there is a way of slicing this four-dimensional arena up into three-dimensional slices such that there are simple rules linking the conditions on one of these slices to others of these slices. And the name of these rules are the fundamental dynamical laws. Energy is conserved, momentum is conserved, number of particles is conserved, so on and so forth. And the parameter along which you string these slices is called time, okay? And there's nothing more metaphysically to time than that, okay? Why should this particular direction in which we can slice the world up in this way be treated so profoundly differently, say, in our language than the other directions? Well, once you think of it this way, it's easy. I mean, I'm going much too fast here. But look, it'll be going from one of these slices to the other. That's the direction in which it's possible to make plans, okay? That's the direction in which the state of the world at one slice is going to, in some sense, follow from the state of the world at other slices. The difference between slicing that way and slicing this way is going to be crucial to anything that counts as an agent or something like that, is going to be absolutely fundamental. Like I say, that's the direction in which you can make plans, so on and so forth. Of course, our language is going to treat that direction very, very differently. So this Williams idea really is an idea, much more so than in relativity, like you were saying, in which space and time are at a fundamental metaphysical level completely of a piece with one another. And the only way these distinctions between the temporal dimensions and the spatial dimensions come into our world is as a result of how the physical properties happen to have been distributed over this four-dimensional arena. Once you have this trick from Williams, you can apply this trick also to relativity, also to relativistic theories, so on and so forth. Like I say, it would be fun to have a more leisurely conversation about this whole picture at some point.
I smell another pedagogical episode.
This is going in a way deeper than what we were doing today. What we were doing today took it for granted that there is a time axis, okay, and a spatial axes, and all we were asking was, what is it that distinguishes the positive direction along the time axis from the negative direction along the time axis? And there, our answer was, oh, it's just that there are special conditions at one end of the time axis and not at the other end of the time axis. This stuff that we're talking about now is in a way going a little deeper and asking, what is the nature of the time axis itself? Or how, and in terms of what, is the time axis distinguished from the spatial axis?
All right, as we're coming to an end, David, I want to give you the floor for final thoughts, but you've also mentioned that a couple of times it's come up that there's room for further work. I also imagine that there are criticisms of this view.
Yes, you mentioned to me before we started that you're going to be talking to Tim Maudlin soon. Tim is the very vivid standout on this, and for that reason, he's really interesting to talk to about this stuff. Tim is somebody who is convinced that there is a fundamental metaphysical distinction between past and future, that this is part of the pre-physics, deep metaphysical structure of the arena in which physics plays out itself, of time itself. Tim indeed thinks that without a distinction between past and future, which he also thinks is a fundamental metaphysical distinction, you can't even talk about what it is to be a physical law. Because for Tim, physical laws are the machines that generate the future out of the past, okay? So it's intrinsic to Tim's very conception of a dynamical law, even if those dynamical laws happen to have this mathematical property of time reversal asymmetry, that in order for the idea of a mechanical law to make sense at all, there must be a deeper metaphysical distinction between past and future. So Tim I think Tim is going to be on board up until, well, I don't want to speak for him. Tim is going to have a very different attitude towards the distinction between past and future than the one I've been foisting on you today.
Are there one or two areas of further work you're most interested in seeing?
Yeah, I think that there's been a lot of, since this work got started in earnest, people have just come up with a lot of curious examples that one doesn't quite know what to do with. For example, okay, but suppose I did have direct control over the position of billiard ball number 5, okay? Suppose that billiard ball number 5 was my memory or something like that, and I imagine somebody who has voluntary control over their memory by changing that, would I actually be changing in the past whether or not billiard ball number 5 was involved in a collision? If you follow some of these examples out, they lead to really counterintuitive consequences. One wants to know what to do about cases like that. So there's now a big literature of cases. I can just mention people like Matthias Frisch, people like Alison Fernandez at Trinity College in Dublin.
Who's wonderful.
Right, who's great, right. There have been lots of people, I think these are all people who are sympathetic to the overall shape of this project, but who have pointed out troubling cases, each of which resulted in a slight modification of the position and in a more detailed understanding of how we're depending on this initial condition, of exactly what role it's playing. So there's a lot to be, there's a lot of senses in which we don't have a good grip on the details of this yet, even among those people like Matthias or Alison, who I would say are reasonably confident that the general approach here is probably on the right track.